makes a great leader? Think of the best leader you've ever had. What makes them so memorable to you? What did they do for you? Did they believe in you before you even believed in yourself? Did they take a chance on you when you weren't ready yet? Did they trust you even when you hadn't earned their trust? Did they have your back even at personal risk to themselves? Want to know why they did it? Then you're at the right place. In this podcast, we dig into the why through deeply personal stories of great leaders who are powered by their purpose, anchored in their authenticity, and connect who they are to how they lead in good times and bad, at crossroads and crises, who challenge status quo and existing paradigms and do different things differently. It will make you wonder, what would you do if you faced a similar challenge? Join us in reimagining the leadership of the future with me, your host, Shahana Banerjee, CEO of Just Human Leadership Advisors. In this episode, we dig into leadership that unlocks innovation with Dr. Paul Peter Tak, CEO of Candel Therapeutics, a biotech company likely to change the lives of millions of patients suffering from prostate, lung, and even pancreatic cancer. He's a physician, a scientist, an academic, and a serial entrepreneur. He's powered by his unrelenting drive to innovate and improve patients' lives. Welcome, Paul Peter. I'm beyond thrilled to have you on our podcast. Such an honor.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
The work that you're doing at Candel is truly inspiring, and it's making a difference to so many patients.
I agree. That's actually the business we are in. We are not interested in any incremental impact. We try to transform the life of patients with huge unmet need.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm excited for this conversation. Okay, let's dive right in. So tell us your story, Paul Peter, the people, influences, and experiences that have shaped you into who you are today.
I grew up in the Netherlands, as people can hear from my Dutch accent. My father was a businessman, I think a very inspirational leader who created from almost nothing the largest caterpillar dealer, caterpillar with bulldozers and engines, in the world, which was based in the Netherlands, and he was active throughout the world. And he had a tendency to speak about his work and leadership during the dinner with the family. And I was very interested in hearing that as a young child. So I've been indoctrinated from a young age by a very strong leader who was like somebody who could build bridges between people. He was very inspirational, very creative, open-minded, non-judgmental. So I guess that's where it started, and where I and my siblings became quite entrepreneurial. At some point, I decided to study medicine. In my study in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, I wanted to spend some time abroad. So I ended up actually at MCG repeatedly, actually, and I learned new things, especially culturally, actually, which have really helped me to be very open-minded. That you can find that in other pieces of the world, things are done differently, but still with good intentions, generally speaking. And things may still be very effective. And you see also limitations in your own culture and in other cultures. So that has helped me to start to think in a broad way. And then there have been many other people after that during my specialty training in internal medicine, in rheumatology.
Is there one particular story from your growing up years that stands out for you as you think about what shaped you?
I went to secondary school. There are different levels of secondary school in the European system. So at a young age, you get to a pretty high level if you're able to learn, and that gives you the fastest access to university. So after initial trouble, because I found school very boring and I failed miserably early on, I had to repeat the whole first year of secondary school, actually, because I had very low grades and I was never studying. I was totally not interested. And my parents didn't seem to bother too much about it, which is also interesting. But then later on, everything changed and things went very well. But there were certain lessons that I found extremely boring. And when something is really boring, I really cannot concentrate. It's not laziness. I just cannot. I cannot listen to things that are so obvious. Like the lessons in mathematics were very obvious and they were extremely good textbooks. So
Yeah.
I could read them and understand it quite quickly. So I asked my parents permission to not go to these lessons and just they would write a letter that I didn't need to attend these lessons. And then I would actually cycle. Dutch children are always on bicycles, gives a lot of mobility and shapes the mind early on. And I would cycle in a little forest close to where the school was. I would just disappear
Yeah.
for hours all on my own, just dream away. And then later I would look in the book and I had very high grades on mathematics. So I thought this empowering that my parents did was actually quite unique. So nowadays it may not be even legal, I don't know. But that has really helped me to get through the things that were immediately clear and then go to the lessons where I wanted to hear the teacher. So I think this whole combination of freedom and accountability, this mix
Yeah.
that I also install in my companies,
Yeah.
has been very important to me early on.
Yeah. That's a powerful lesson to learn so young.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, right? This is beautiful, a little forest actually. And I went back many years later and stood there on the little bridge, and you see the water and the trees reflected in the water. And I took a picture.
Yeah.
That looks quite good actually. And then in my house, I have this blown up from the floor to the ceiling actually in a very big frame. It's huge. So
Yeah.
every time it reminds me of who I was as a child
Yeah. Oh
and,
my
and
God,
how I
that's
would spend
amazing.
my times in mathematics and other lessons, but just cycling in the forest and watching the huge trees and how old they were
Yeah.
and getting inspiration from unexpected sources. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. That's such a great story. You've had such a storied career full of twists and turns and seemingly unusual choices. You've been a physician, you've been in academia, you've been in big pharma and small biotech. That's quite a career. Could you share a little bit about that journey and what drove some of those choices for you?
One key constant feature is that I always did something that I did not plan at all, actually. So after my secondary school, I just described how that went. I wanted to go to university, and actually, I looked at different things, ranging from chemistry to psychology to economics, and in the end, I had decided to study economics. But
Okay.
then I was like 17 years old. We with the family went to a summer holiday in Mallorca, Spain. And I got very sick there, actually, very sick from one day to another, and was never properly diagnosed. And every day there was another doctor coming into my hotel room with a new diagnosis, new injections and tablets and pills, and it was horrible. And I was in such a miserable condition that I could even not walk back when we flew back after several weeks.
Yeah.
I was in a wheelchair, and it took me many months to recover, actually.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then I thought, if medicine is really about so much uncertainty about diagnosis and treatment, it must be better to do that. And I switched my choice actually from economics to medicine in an almost naive idea, but that changed my whole fate. And I decided to become a medical doctor. So that was the first key decision. A
Right.
theme in my career has always been I do want to excel in what I do. It's like almost
Right.
like a Calvinistic responsibility. And I felt more
Mm.
home in the more intellectual subspecialties. And in Europe, then you land in internal medicine, which is different from internal medicine in the US. So maybe I need to explain that. This is not like GP. This is a hospital-based specialty. It's like 6 years
Right.
of internal medicine training, and so I try to become as good as possible, to learn as much as possible about the different subspecialties in internal medicine. After 2 years or so, I thought I had done some research during my medical studies, but I thought I would like to do more research actually, right? And I started to describe case reports, did very interesting N is one experiments that I published at a
Right.
relatively young age. And then I spoke, first part of the training is in a so-called non-academic peripheral clinic, which was actually outstanding. That we would treat the royal family and members of the government.
Wow.
Truly interesting experience, very good leadership. So I learned so much in terms of clinical skills. But then the second part was in the academic institute, which is now called the Leiden University Medical Center. And 1 year after I arrived, I spoke to my boss, the professor of medicine, like a semi-god, right, in the European system, and the head of a huge department at the Leiden University Medical Center. I said, I would be really interested in learning more about research. I'm just working day and night in the clinic. And then something happened again that was completely unplanned. The Dutch government had identified a gap, basically, in medicine, which is the gap between basic science and clinical excellence. So they started the program, and there were 4 candidates in the country that they were going to fund to become like the translational scientist of the future.
Right.
2 in surgery, 2 in internal medicine. So it's the same theme again. And half of them in Rotterdam, half of them in Leiden. So my boss, the professor of medicine, remembered my story. And I had a special interest at the time in endocrinology. This program was all about immunology, rheumatology. There was an element of geriatrics, probably in part based on the financial sources that were behind it. And so think about the combination of rheumatology and geriatrics. You start to think about osteoarthritis. So first I declined, but then many people spoke to me, and I realized that this was an incredible honor, actually. And that would give me an incredible opportunity to deeply understand methodology, ranging from basic science to clinical epidemiology and biostatistics. There was this incredible training program. So in the end, I did it. And that changed my whole life, from becoming an endocrinologist focused on thyroid disease and diabetes into somebody who had to learn everything from scratch in immunology. And I got complete freedom. I got an office. I got a pager. You had the pagers in those days, way before the mobile phones. I got freedom. I just had to focus on these themes, and I needed to develop the protocol from scratch. I got access to 3 very strong professors who would supervise me. One was the head of internal medicine. One was a world-famous professor of rheumatology. The other was a world-famous professor of immunology in kidney disease. So I would talk to these people. I would go back to the literature from decades ago and created a whole new research line from scratch.
That's amazing.
And that's how I became, at a young age, relatively famous in the world, actually, focused on synovial biology. So everything that happens in the joint of patients with rheumatology. And, because I had such a strong internal medicine background, I thought, you need to understand what happens in the tissue. So I thought, we need to take biopsies from the tissue. Nobody did that, actually. And I just started to experiment myself and taught myself these techniques, and then built a whole research line about tissue analysis. My career was destined to become a full professor of internal medicine at the Leiden University Medical Center. So I did all of this work while doing the translational research and basic research in rheumatology. And then my boss, who had selected me for this program, said, okay, now I want you to become the head of the intensive care unit. So I have been, during my training for 1 year, the head of the intensive care unit. I said, I've built a whole research line in rheumatology, so I cannot do that. So I proposed that I become a half-time professor at internal medicine and half-time work at rheumatology. These are different specialties in the Netherlands. He said that was unacceptable. So then I thought, okay, then I leave, actually. So I left my permanent position as an associate professor of internal medicine, joined the rheumatology department, and started the whole research line there, while also completing 3 years of rheumatology training. So then I also, at the same time, completed my PhD. And 2 weeks later, I was offered a full professorship at the Amsterdam University Medical Center. There was actually no department, but I would become the department head of a department that did not exist yet. So first I was like a professor without any personnel, without any budget, and even without patients. So I called my wife that day. I said, I feel like a king without a country. Do you have any idea what the professor is doing all day? I have nothing here. But 12 years later, I had a unit with 140 FTEs. We had our own biotech company.
Wow.
And we published on average 1 paper per week. So we built this from scratch in a very entrepreneurial way. And I thought, I'm never going to leave. And then at some point, there was like an imminent midlife crisis. I thought I could also do something completely different, right? I can carry on until I retire. Maybe we can publish one paper per 6 days. We had almost endless resources. We were funded by the NIH, by the European funds, by the Dutch funds. We worked with all pharma companies and many biotech companies. So it brought in a lot of money. It was like a machine, actually. It was like a company. But then suddenly I thought, maybe I can also do something completely different. And I spread the rumor that I would be available to do something completely different. So I had the idea that I would never work for pharma. And then GSK called me, GlaxoSmithKline. And this was a very good talent manager because he engaged in a whole discussion. So can you help me understand what's behind this and that? And then she said, the head of R&D has a very similar background as you have. He
Ah,
was the head of internal medicine at UCL, University College London. He's a famous professor. Amsterdam is not that far from London. Why don't you fly in to meet him in person? The conversation with somebody with a very similar background who really tried to do the right thing for patients convinced me ultimately to change my mind.
yeah. That's an amazing story. And then what brought you to biotech?
When I made the transition from academia to pharma, I was a little bit nervous about my own decision. These things are not easy, right?
Right.
So I'm a builder of new things. And first, I became the head of discovery and development of immunoinflammation worldwide. And then later, I saw more and more opportunities in oncology, for example.
Yeah.
And I spoke to my colleague, the head of oncology, and said, I think rather than combining all these immune checkpoint inhibitors, you may want to think more about how to interfere with the tumor microenvironment, because that's holding these immune cells back, and that's why they cannot be successful, right? This is actually the world of somebody who's a specialist in immunoinflammation, like
Right.
myself. And then he said, this is a great idea, but this is not on strategy, so we're not going to change that. So then I spoke again to the same Patrick Vellens, the global head of R&D of GSK. And we decided in the end to reorganize. And then I became the head of a cluster of therapy area units consisting of immunoinflammation. So I had to find myself a new successor who was now going to report to me, and the head of oncology and the head of infectious diseases. So the whole immunology cluster. And then I could really start to play with budget and science to really promote research in oncology. So this was an amazing time. I was on all the governance boards. I was the chair of the scientific review board, the most senior governance board, evaluating all the science for the company. And then at some point, having done this for 7.5 years, the moment had come actually to move on and to do exactly this in a more entrepreneurial setting, to your
Right.
question. And that's why, and I have been involved in biotech and company building throughout my career, actually. Even
Yeah.
when I was in training for internal medicine, I created a company focused on occupational medicine. In the end, customers like Akzo Nobel, the big chemistry industry. So this whole thing went out of hand and I sold it at some point. When I was a professor of rheumatology in Amsterdam, I also started a commercial clinic for musculoskeletal diseases in Dubai. I also had my own biotech company focused on in vivo gene therapy called Atrogen. When I was at GSK, there was also a biotech company in my shop called Tempero Pharmaceuticals. And that helped to get better alignment between this biotech and big pharma. And then ultimately, in this case, we decided to internalize this as a unit. At the same time, I also created something that was called the Immunology Network, a whole new way of working between academia and big
Yeah.
pharma. And the spin out of that was a company that I created while being in this leadership role at GSK as a chief immunology officer and the global head of development. And we created a company called Citrix Therapeutics, which is based in Oxford. And I'm still on the board of Citrix, and they're doing very well. It was again a natural transition to go from big pharma to biotech because I already had a lot of experience.
Paul Peter, as you reflect back on your career, right, and all of the choices that you made, and if you had to just summarize it and say what's the driving force behind most of those choices, what would you say?
My deep motivation to better the life of patients, which
Yeah.
started with a kind of personal experience, but throughout my career, this is my driving force. I moved from academia to big pharma, of course, not really based on the midlife crisis, but because I thought at some point, imagine, I have a lot of ideas, imagine that I can contribute to the development and the creation of a new medicine. Then, well, I now touch the life of maybe hundreds or thousands of patients that I
Right.
treat, maybe through my academic research. If you develop a medicine, you may actually improve the life of millions of patients. And
Sure.
you don't know whether that's going to happen, but that was my deep motivation. And the second is really to always learn new skills and to be out of my comfort zone is something that's good for me. I'm a curious person and I need to be exposed to new ideas, to new learnings all the time to stay happy. And the third is I discovered over time that I always used more or less the same principles of building teams, of leadership, that work like a recipe in a way, for me at least. I think it's always the same leadership principles that I want to apply in a new context where I see a new unmet need actually to lead a change to really drive innovation and improvement. The foundation of it is trust, right? It's very important to really be thoughtful about building trust in any organization. That's the basis of everything. So how do you achieve that? I mean, different principles here, but one is, of course, high levels of integrity and transparency, which are key. Always trying to do the right thing and being truthful. It's also about, for example, doing what you say that you do. The roof is about collective intelligence. How can you actually think about the sports team, right? There have been top sports teams, let's say the Dutch soccer team, right? Where there was not necessarily one single star, right?
Right.
There were multiple very gifted players who created something like collective intelligence or something collective that really would bring them to a whole different level.
Yeah.
And the same is true in any team, like whether it's academic. And it's difficult in academia because there's such a strong focus on individual performance. How can you make sure to achieve that people can get over their ego?
As CEO of Candel, you've engineered quite an epic transformation. So, talk to us about the early days in 2020 when you were walking in or joining Candel. What were you walking into?
Maybe I should first say, well, why did I join actually? I was contacted by a search company and heard about the predecessor, the legacy company of Candel. They had two programs in solid tumors. And I looked at them and I thought, what I see are two medicines potentially because they seem to work, but I think there's still many question marks about the mechanism of action. I spoke to key experts in the field in academia, in neurosurgery and urology, what have you. And based on these conversations, I got the feeling that there is a potential medicine here or two medicines. A lot of work needs to be done to get this right, to understand the mechanism of action, to prioritize the portfolio, to bring in people who really understand drug discovery. I was not immediately convinced that I was going this path, but then I thought, if I get this company right and we are successful, then probably I will have had a bigger impact on patients' lives than when I joined a very big company, which is like an
Right.
oil tanker. It may sail with or without me. Maybe I can make a
Right.
little bit of change, but this is where my impact will be bigger. So that's why I joined. I drove massive change in this company. This is never easy, actually. But as a result, we had a brand new executive team with decades of experience in drug discovery and development in immunology and oncology. We know what it takes to get the medicine over the finish line. And I've also created the Research Advisory Board, RAB, where we can always pick up the phone and talk to the world leaders in immuno-oncology. And if you go to our website, you see the names, including people like Jim Allison, the Nobel Prize laureate, other key leaders that I highly respect. Then I worked closely with the board to make some additional changes to the composition of the board. It's always like a tricky process because they can actually fire the CEO rather than the other
Right.
one. So this had to be done in a very good dialogue. And we brought in some very senior new leaders with a lot of experience in big pharma, in manufacturing, in finance. So this has been good, I think. This has been very helpful. And then I prioritized the portfolio, which was also necessary, certainly to be able to survive. And whether you lead a very big organization like I did at GSK, where you have a very large budget, or a very small organization like Candel, the principles are exactly the same. You will always need to prioritize and focus on the best programs.
Yeah. It got to the point, though, that there was almost a NASDAQ notice for delisting, right? And so, talk more about what that journey was like at that point, and then, bringing it to where it is today, where you're having success in phase three trials, even.
We got actually, as part of this whole process of change, we got on the NASDAQ. So I did a straight to market IPO. That means we skipped a crossover round. So usually people do a crossover, get money in the bank, and then they do on top of that an IPO, which is generally the best way to do it. But we felt a sense of urgency to become a public company, because it also helped me to drive change in the company in terms of really optimizing governance,
Right.
etc. And there were too many gaps in the programs to be able to do a proper crossover round. And also, this was 2021, so things started to get
COVID.
ugly
Yeah.
already. It was very difficult. So in the end, we did a relatively small IPO, but it helped us to clean up process, also to bring in some money. We've been very cost effective in how we spend it. We did not go back to the markets, actually. We did not dilute any investor until December 2024. So this was more than 3 years later, actually. But then things were very difficult in general in the market. We needed time to show that, well, I believe that our medicines work. You need to convince people who are not used to looking at very new science.
Sure.
There's a lot of prejudice. People also have a lot of prejudice about intratumoral approaches, because there have been intratumoral approaches that failed commercially. And then people think, oh, it's a commercial failure, it's intratumoral, so therefore intratumoral approaches will fail. And I think this is
Right.
completely flawed. This is completely confounded, because these intratumoral approaches that are not a commercial success are actually not very effective medicines.
Right.
There's nothing easier than putting a needle into a tumor. Like in prostate cancer, this whole procedure takes 15 to 20 minutes in an outpatient clinic, generally easier than a standard of care prostate biopsy. You do it 3 times in a patient's life in an
Wow.
outpatient setting, no local anesthesia even needed, no special equipment needed, and the
Yeah.
patient walks out
Yeah.
of the clinic with maybe some mild flu-like symptoms that last 24 hours, and that's it. So compare that to radiotherapy and chemotherapy, or even
Sounds
immune checkpoint
unbelievable.
inhibitors. Right? So there's
Yeah.
completely wrong concepts about these, but these things were not easy. Meanwhile, we were going through a crisis in biotech in general. So we were on the NASDAQ, but because we didn't have a lot of new data, we were just focusing on delivering and operational excellence at that time. Step by step, the share price went a little bit lower, completely disconnected from the data that we had and the potential, because I've never seen a company before with 100% success. We have had 100% success in the last 3 years. I'm not going to say that that will be like that forever. It's just impossible. But we have been extremely successful. But meanwhile, the share price went down. So that means the market cap was very small. And I did get a warning letter from the NASDAQ that we got, that we
Wow.
were at risk at that point. And then shortly after that, we were able to release the first data in pancreatic cancer. So everybody knows that's an awful disease. And we focus on so-called borderline resectable pancreatic cancer. And we did a small randomized clinical trial that we see a complete separation of the curves for overall survival between CAN-2409 treatment, that's our viral immunotherapy that leads to in situ immunization against the patient's own tumor. So basically, we educate the patient's own immune system how to recognize and kill their own tumor cells. And we compared that to the standard of care. And these patients received optimal chemotherapy and chemoradiation. So we've recently confirmed these data. There was like more than 32-month overall survival in the CAN-2409 group compared to
Wow.
12.5 months in the control group. So I would always say that passes the bloody obvious test, right? As we say in Britain, the BOT. It means that you know that you have a medicine there, right? And you see all
Yeah.
biological biomarkers change accordingly. We even have a patient who was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic pancreatic cancer who's still alive after 5 years.
my goodness.
So
Wow.
you know this is like the HIV patient from Berlin who was cured. I don't say that this patient was cured. What we see is a whole new paradigm. And we
Yeah.
change the balance between the anti-tumor immune response on the one hand and
Yeah.
the patient's tumor on the other. And we've confirmed this in different settings. We had another patient who underwent surgery and there was still a resident tumor. The pancreatic cancer was still there. This patient also is still alive 3 years later. So we've confirmed all of that in lung cancer. But that drove the steep increase in the share price. So we were out of trouble again.
Yeah. That's phenomenal, especially because pancreatic cancer, especially, is supposed to be notoriously
Yes.
difficult to treat and high mortality rates as well. And so, I mean, it's truly a glimmer of hope for so many patients.
I
Indeed.
totally agree. It also illustrates that we focus on indications where everybody else have failed, actually.
Yeah.
And that's also why investors were skeptical because they've never seen anything like this until they
Yeah.
saw the data. And we got fast track designation and we got orphan drug designation from
Yeah.
the FDA based on these data. Now, recently, we've confirmed all of this in a much larger cohort of patients with therapy resistant non-small cell lung cancer. 90%, 90 of these patients had stage 4 metastatic disease.
Oh
They
my
had failed
goodness.
everything. They had failed chemotherapy. They had failed immune checkpoint inhibitor treatment. And we've shown that with just 2 administrations of CAN-2409, we observed doubling of the expected median overall survival. So we are not aware of any data in the pipeline of the industry that come even close to this. So, but it
Yeah.
also confirms the concept of post-progression survival, where the patients live a much longer life with actually a good quality of life because the treatment is well tolerated.
Yes.
And the patient, ultimately, the medicine are the patient's own immune cells. So it's a very natural mechanism.
Yeah. That's just phenomenal. This podcast is brought to you by Just Human Leadership Advisors. We specialize in executive coaching and a broad range of human capital solutions. To learn more, visit us at justhuman.io. And now, back to the podcast. What was the hardest part of the journey for you in the transformation of Candel looking back? And what was the most surprising, maybe?
Well, a very difficult part is that a lot of this is about deep survival. That's not always easy. Like I described, actually, the fact that our market cap was low at some point, and we had to make some very difficult decisions. I had already, when I came, made difficult decisions in terms of prioritization of the portfolio.
Yeah.
And I applied the following principles. So first, what is the scientific reason to believe that this is going to work? After the whole pressure testing, right, the polishing of the diamond process. Second, what is the medical unmet need?
Hmm.
Third, what is the developability, right? If it takes forever and there's no regulatory pathway, then you need to think twice. Then what is the commercial opportunity? We did very extensive commercial work for a biotech company, working with the best of the best externally, like Globe Life Sciences in the UK. Did extensive market research and payer research. So that helped me to prioritize the portfolio. And basically, we only focus on potential blockbuster indications. Why? Because with the same effort, you can have a much bigger impact. It doesn't mean that we want to abandon the other indications, but you cannot do everything at the same time, especially not as a small biotech company. A really difficult decision was about the use of the same medicine, investigational medicine, CAN-2409, which was in development for high-grade glioma, brain
Hmm.
cancer. And
Hmm.
we had encouraging phase 2 data actually at the time that have been published. And we had started the development of a protocol, phase 3 protocol, supported by the FDA, supported by the EMA in Europe. And then thinking about prioritization and resources, I came to the conclusion that we should not start this trial. And that was, of course, a highly controversial decision because everybody is super excited, the neurosurgery
Right.
community. We had encouraging initial data. The board expected that this would work. But then I laid out this was a first-line treatment of glioblastoma, how much time it would cost to get to an answer, actually. I said, probably we're not going to survive that because it's a very big commitment. Very large trial. Median overall survival at diagnosis is 15 months, very short. But still, it means a long timeline to get to the answers. And we should not do this. Another very difficult decision was to, when I came and joined the company, the previous management had started to build its own manufacturing capability. And
Right.
it's fantastic, right? You feel proud that you're building your own factory.
Sure.
But it's a huge risk because you need a big fixed cost.
Yeah.
Think of headcount, all the investments. Well, there is
Capital investment. Yep.
overcapacity in the industry. So I stopped that actually and changed it into a discovery lab. And we outsourced manufacturing, but overseen by very strong leaders that we brought in. So that was another difficult decision, I think, for people who were proud of building this manufacturing capability. If we had not made these decisions, we would not have survived.
Yeah.
And it's easy to mention names of companies that have made different decisions and that do not exist anymore. And
Sure.
I visited another company in the greater Boston area just a few weeks ago because we wanted to look at their lab, and they had made major investments in manufacturing. And then the phase 3 trial was negative, and now they are at risk of falling over shortly. So
Yeah.
these are difficult decisions. The most difficult decision, Shahana, was to let 50% of my people go.
Oh my goodness.
That breaks your
That's
heart.
hard.
And we spent a lot of time on bringing in very good people. We very much focus on building a very strong culture. People love working for us. We have a lot of fun. And we have the feeling that we changed the world. We changed the face of oncology. It's a very strong culture. And then you have these people, and then you need to let half of them go. It was very difficult. We've tried very hard to help them to find another job. I think everybody found another job, so that's great. That was really difficult. If we had not done this, we would not have existed actually. Because
Yeah.
now we sailed through all these storms during the last few years. And then in December last year, we had the big prize basically, which was the positive readout of a large phase 3 clinical trial in early localized prostate cancer. There is really no other program. There's no
Yeah.
competition in that field because it takes a very long time to do such a trial. You know what? We have done it. We hit the primary endpoint convincingly and all the secondary endpoints. And so this is great. And that helped us to raise again funding. The first time I went back to the markets, we had to do all the work that we now need to do. So we raised 92 million in December. And that meant that I could press all the buttons for manufacturing in an
Yeah.
externalized model. Right? But I did not have this big cost. We closed the whole process, but we did not scale it up for commercial manufacturing. And that's what we're doing right now.
May I ask you a difficult question? But that moment of time where you're standing on the precipice of where you can see the potential, you know that there is a good outcome. You're shouting from the rooftops, but no one else is hearing you. Has got to be one of the hardest moments, right? How do
Yes.
you keep yourself focused? How do you keep your team focused? And how do you overcome that moment?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good point because I learned early on in academia, because based on how my mind works, where I can see innovation early on. And I think I've been proven true right many times, not to be right, self-righteous or brag. But that's why I'm a very highly cited scientist. I can give many examples, ranging from gene therapy to bioelectronics. We've done all kinds of things that nobody believed in at the time. And now it becomes kind of mainstream. All of that has been reproduced. So now we are in this space with viral immunotherapy. So I learned early on with my own teams that for me as a leader, it is important to look over my shoulder now and then to see if everybody's still there. Are they still following you actually, right? And you can achieve that by talking about what you're doing, by communicating a lot. You can hardly over communicate. After the layoff, nobody left the company despite a very short runway. In December last year, before the readout of prostate cancer, we had a runway of just a few months.
Wow.
Our employees had seen that we let half of their colleagues go, and they all stayed with us actually. So I think it's an illustration of the fact that we got this piece right. First, we have the right people actually who've been super loyal and worked very hard Also, they needed to work the work of people who reported to them in the past, actually, because they were gone. So I always say, well, even the CEO needs to be able to wash the dishes and put the trash can out. Right? So then it's difficult with the external world. Right? So think of pharmaceutical companies who say, well, we don't do intratumoral. I touched upon it because they've seen one example, which was probably TVEC or Logic, which is an approved medicine commercialized by Amgen for melanoma. And it is doing something, right? That's why it was approved. But they missed their endpoint of overall survival at launch. You need to inject again and again. You need to inject all the metastases. And therefore, it's not a commercial success. Also, there's a complex cold chain. You need to store it at minus 80 degrees and etc. Right? We have none of these problems with CAN-2409. You just give 2 administrations. Even in metastatic disease, it hardly seems to matter where you inject. You just choose that tumor to teach the immune cells how to recognize the tumor, and they circulate. And they start to kill also the uninjected metastases. There's no cold chain. It's stable in the fridge at 4 degrees centigrade. So this is a whole different story, but it is difficult when you get this feedback, say, well, we don't do intratumoral. And I, as a physician who has treated patients for 25 years and has put needles into every body compartment, I asked them, so why would you not do that? And nobody can give you an example. But then they deprioritized the meeting. So here's the good news.
So it's a bias. It's not really based on evidence of what's
Not at all. The good news is we are starting to see success. We've shown success of Candel in pancreatic cancer, in lung cancer, in prostate cancer, big placebo-controlled trial, right? This is real. But then with the second medicine, we have success in completely therapy-resistant glioblastoma, that everybody has failed. This has been a graveyard for the industry. We published the data in Nature. You cannot go higher, right? And we got a very big grant of $16 million from the Breakthrough Cancer Foundation. We got fast track designation, orphan drug designation, also for this program. A lot of external validation. So people will start to see it. There's CG Oncology that is successful in bladder cancer. There's Replimune that is successful in melanoma. These are biotech companies. So there is now critical mass, but there's also big pharma joining now. The first big company really getting into this field is Johnson & Johnson. So they have created a big unit focused on intratumoral approaches in solid tumors. And we don't see any of these as competitors. Right? We will write the same tart. And this has been the same with antibody drug conjugates, with radioligands, with CAR T cells, with immune checkpoint inhibitors, with antibodies for rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis. Initially, nobody believes in it. And then at some point, everybody gets FOMO because they start to see the success. This is the new big thing. And they all want their own program. That's why I posted about this last week. I saw that there are like 30 programs in oncology focused on the combination of PD-1 and VEGF. Why would you do that? It's better to focus on real innovation that can be transformative. So that is a hard process. It's not easy, as you mentioned. But it can be done, and it will ultimately be dictated by the data and by the patient's experience.
Yeah. Looking back at your journey, there are definitely a few themes that come through really strongly. One is this drive to build something that comes through very clearly. There is a drive to innovate and sometimes take the path that is less common, right? Or less taken. That seems to come through quite clearly. And then there is a drive to really serve patients, right? Based on your own early experiences. But certainly that comes through very clearly. Why is that so important for you?
Starts with the focus on patients. I described some of my initial personal experiences, but I've seen this, of course, as a doctor, somebody who's trained many medical specialists, that I think we can do a much better job in medicine by thinking beyond just protocols, right? And you need protocols, obviously, as a starting point, but being really compassionate doctor for your patients. There's still huge unmet needs with all the progress. Let's say I was a professor of rheumatology, right? Then we got the TNF blockers. We participated in the first clinical trial in the world, basically, with TNF blockers, together with the Kennedy Institute of Rheumatology in London. Actually, now I'm a trustee on that board. We've seen that many times, but then there were other biologicals The reality is that still about 50% of the patients with rheumatoid arthritis at any time point, despite all these new medicines, will still have active disease. And then
Wow.
I've seen older consultant firms when I was at GSK saying, rheumatoid arthritis is a crowded area, and that basically means you should not focus on it. Well, it's actually
Right.
the most prevalent autoimmune disease, and actually half of them still have active disease. So there
Right.
are all these wrong ideas about how the big unmet need and what we could do for patients. So this
Yeah.
whole intrinsic motivation to try to improve in a field that's close to my expertise. The second is in everything you do, I feel that I want to excel, not to show to others how smart I am or whatever. I don't care whether other people see it, but it's just an internal motivation to do the best. I think the third is deep curiosity, actually, and a very open mind. I'm a big fan of, let's say, lateral thinking. It's a different way of thinking. I like to look just next to my own field. So that's how a rheumatologist ended up leading oncology programs. And I call it reverse rheumatology. My CSO is also a rheumatologist. We bring a whole new perspective based on biology that we deeply understand. But actually, we try more or less to simplify this, to do the
Yeah.
opposite of what we tried to do in the past. We tried to suppress the immunoinflammatory reaction, and now we try to activate it with the same biology. So
Yeah.
I think these are some of the principles underlying what I try to do. So in science, it should always be about truth seeking. Like
Yeah.
sometimes in pharma, people ask questions like, do we really want to have this information? Because it's possible that it will not look favorable for our medicine. And I said, well, here's my view. We try to seek the truth. So if this medicine is not as good as we think it is, we'd better find out actually. So we take a
Right.
hit. But ultimately, that is the right thing to do.
What is a leadership lesson you've learned the hard way?
I learned how important it is to identify what you are allergic to in terms of leadership, right? What is your
Mm.
opposing style? So for me is that people are completely obsessed by details. As a scientist, I'm very detail oriented, but on the other hand, I'm more like visionary and like the focus on the bigger picture. And I discovered that some of these people can actually irritate me a little bit. Right? If they cannot switch their style to other styles. Right? And then I learned from this executive coach that it's A, very important to be aware of this, and B, actually, when you build a team, you need to recruit in your allergy zone and build teams that have very different leadership styles. And I
Yeah.
do this very deliberately. So I built my new team at Candel from scratch. But when I interview people, I do not really only try to get my head around who they are, what their skills are, how their behaviors are, their cultural values, all of that. But I also try to think, how do they fit in the bigger picture?
It's true that a lot of people are not intentional about how they build their teams and making sure that there is enough diversity of thought, right, in their teams. So
Yes.
this is really, and styles and approaches.
Yeah.
So that's really great to hear. Think about maybe the best leader you've ever worked with. What makes this leader truly memorable for you?
I learned how I don't want to lead, actually. Right? I don't like the textbook of Machiavelli, etc. So I don't like psychopath and sociopath, and there are many, right? In general, probably 5 to 10% at the top of society. It's a beautiful book
Totally.
about this. I got a book for Father's Day a long time ago from my children called Snakes in Suits that describes this phenomenon. So I don't like to work with these people. So let me choose one leader who had a big impact on my life. I was in training to become basically a professor of internal medicine. It was a unique opportunity. And then I started to work with rheumatology. And the head of the department of rheumatology was one of the three people who supervised me, right? Who were like a think tank for me, like a soundboard.
Right.
And one of them is called Professor Ferry Breedveld, who was a celebrity at the time. He was one of the people who worked with the Kennedy Institute, did these first trials. And when I was in training to become in internal medicine, I thought rheumatology was probably the most boring subspecialty in internal medicine. And during the first
Right.
phase of my training, I even put that in an annual review with my boss then and said maybe it would be good for me to work temporarily like a rotation. in the rheumatology department, because maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I think. Ferry Breedveld helped me understand that the next big revolution would be in rheumatology of all subspecialties. And that has helped me also to go this path of this specific training program to become a physician scientist and to ultimately make a massive move actually from an associate professor with the offer to become a full professor in internal medicine, lead the intensive care unit of a prestigious academic unit, actually start all over again almost and become a rheumatologist. So I think that was great leadership. He did very well because he led a very large department in Leiden. The Dutch rheumatology was very ahead of the curve, I think, in the world.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he became basically the CEO and dean combined function of the whole Leiden University Medical Center, which is a huge center. So I think that also validates my view that he was a very strong leader.
Yeah. So many questions, right? We tried to put a few together into a rapid fire section. You wake up one day and you realize you're a superhero. What's your superpower and what would you do with it?
My superpower is perseverance. I've done that with Candel Therapeutics. This has not been an easy journey based on the whole past history of the company, but also markets that we do not control. We had to make very difficult decisions. We persevered. So when you walk into our office, you see the three key cultural behaviors, the key values, and one of them is perseverance.
What is one thing you've learned about yourself that surprised you?
What I did not know is that I'm an early adopter of new ideas. I see things, and that this is based on how my brain is wired, I think. And I spoke about lateral thinking and just looking next to the path, or look at the interface of different fields, actually, where there's a lot of discovery just waiting to be discovered. I discovered that my judgment there is not bad, but I will always test it with externals. Doesn't mean that I will change my mind, but I will change my mind when I hear compelling arguments.
What is one failure you're proud of?
There are many actually, right? So it's important to learn from failure. I would not call it failure, what I'm going to say. I'm going to call this success. We had a program at GSK, which was widely considered the best program in discovery and early development. And it was the RIB1 kinase program. It was an amazing program, beautiful chemistry, very strong team, highly innovative. Nobody had the same science as we did. And I decided, and this is my signature experimental medicine clinical trial, I designed experimental medicine clinical trials. These are small, high density of data trials in rheumatoid arthritis and in psoriasis and inflammatory bowel disease, all in parallel. These are not powered for statistical significance, but they are powered for what I called earlier the bloody obvious test. You will know, right, if you don't see any improvement in patients and you don't see any changes in the biopsies and you see that you hit the target, but it doesn't translate into the right molecular signatures, that actually you don't have a medicine. Maybe there are trends. Maybe if you do a study with hundreds of patients, there will be statistical significance, but it will never transform the life of patients and it will never be a commercial success.
Right.
So the RIB1 kinase program, it's fair to say there were trends, but basically the conclusion was this is not a transformative medicine. We did not waste further resources. We published all of this. We did not expose additional patients to medicines that are never going to really change their lives. So this whole concept of predicting failure is one of the signatures of my career. And so at the same time, I'm proud of it because then you can focus on things that are more likely to be successful.
Yeah. What I'm also hearing you saying is that marginal is not good enough. It may be statistically significant, but it is not significant in the life of the patient. So it's not.
Totally. And I can give many examples. We developed this concept of experimental medicine early on in rheumatology. I tested a medicine known as anakinra early on. And I gave the feedback to the company, then Amgen, that it worked, but it was not transformative and I would not develop it. Now, they did develop it. Actually, they reached statistical significance. Actually, it was approved. But I do not know any rheumatologist who prescribes this for rheumatoid arthritis.
Right. Thank you. That's a great example. What is one piece of career advice that's helped you in your career? And maybe what's one piece of career advice you'd like to share with our listeners?
maybe two pieces. Or if you start to do something, always try to excel.
Mm.
To do really the best thing you can. And the second is work with the best people.
Yeah.
If you need to work hard now and then it's better to work hard with somebody who's really smart, actually, and who is interested in your development and who brings the right values. So working with the right people, selecting the right people as your mentor and leader is critical.
Yeah, great advice. We always ask our guests to give our listeners a mindful leadership challenge. So, what would be your mindful leadership challenge of the month? Something that they could try to improve their own leadership.
My question would be to people is to think, is there a way to do what you do right now in a fundamentally different way? Not because different is better, but just to do the intellectual exercise. What would that look like? Because very often I hear this cannot be done because nobody has done it,
Right.
etc. And get beyond that point, actually, because often it is actually not true. So innovation is not, you don't do innovation for the sake of innovation. You don't do things differently because you just want to be different. But it
Yeah.
is important to have the intellectual discipline to just step back and to brainstorm with yourself and people you trust and your friends and colleagues, and just ask the question without making any decision, without any judgment.
Yeah.
What could it look like? What if we would do it this way or that way, right? And then ultimately you may decide to just stay with doing exactly what you've done before, or there may be things you have not considered.
Yeah. Oh, that is great. I love it. Paul Peter, this has been such a joy. So much wisdom, so many meaningful stories, and so many lessons and insights. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with our listeners today.
So it was a real pleasure, and thank you for an amazing conversation. Very good questions. You really made me think hard, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Paul Peter. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Mindful Leadership Podcast brought to you by Just Human. We are a growth accelerator for our clients, helping your people and businesses thrive through human centered, ecosystem based people solutions. To learn more, visit us at justhuman.io and schedule a 30-minute free call with us.